one of the reasons you get into drawing these kind of things is because it turns you on or because this excites you. So that's part of what's behind us as creators. We do stuff we enjoy. Hello and welcome to the QUACKCAST. This is the Drunkduck QUACKCAST. I'm Ozone Ocean, and with me is Talon Serene and Fallopian Crusader. Hello.
Hello.
Hello. Hi.
And so our special guest, Fallopian Crusader, is joining us to talk about fetishes in webcomics, which is an interesting subject because we don't have Pitface this week. So the idea behind this particular QUACKCAST was...
we don't even have veins, the cryptid. So.
The cryptid, exactly. So we were inspired by Pitface and her love of leather masks, you know, with zips and stuff like that. You know, the gimp kind of masks, and her like visual and aesthetic appreciation of that, and how she's getting more into it, and not in a sexual way, but just because she likes, you know, wearing them and the look of them. And that kind of stuff is associated with the fetish community and fetishism. It's like a logo for fetishism almost. It's like a visual kind of shortcut for what fetishism is. Someone in a leather mask, even though it doesn't represent all fetishes, but to people it sort of seems to. So that was a jumping off point, and we're going to talk about that. But before we get into it, I have to bring up the featured comic. So the featured comic this week was the Halloween fashion show, which I will talk about now. I'm Ozone Ocean, and my feature for the week was Halloween fashion show. The Halloween fashion show was a cool little community project where a lot of DD creators participated. They submitted their characters as models and then dressed them up to do a Halloween fashion show. I love looking at the creativity on show here and the enthusiasm of the creators to share and show off their designs to each other. I'm sorry that it's not a comic this week, but community projects are just as worth celebrating as a feature. Please give some props and comments to the great work of the creators who participated in this. This was a project organised and curated, managed, sorted out by Sleeping Gorilla and his various comics. I think one of his earliest ones that I liked was Unlikely Saviour Chyla, which he's been doing for many years now, probably over 20 years, I think. So he's been right at the forefront doing webcomics for a long, long time. And I think Chyla is even one of the models in the Halloween fashion show, which is great. And there's all these other models from all these other creators as well. So, you know, pop in and have a look at what they've done and see all the different outfits on these different characters. It's really, really cool. I just love that kind of creativity and that community spirit of doing your own bit of creation and wanting to show that off for other people, and all joining in as a community to create something together. So have a look at Halloween Fashion Show, managed by Sleeping Gorilla, and it's rated E, because it's appropriate for everyone. And that was the featured comic. Okay, so next up we have the featured music. This week Gumwallis has given us the theme to Halloween fashion show, funnily enough, the same as our featured comic. This music is creepy and beautiful synth scene setting that creates space and volume and then fills it with a meat-grinding steamroller of death that slashes and crushes all in its path like a huge armoured monster. So take it away, Gumwallis, with Halloween fashion show. that was Halloween Fashion Show, The Theme by Gumwallace. So next up, we're talking about fetishes in webcomics. So, yeah, Pipface was our inspiration for this. Our guest is Fallopian Crusader. So you brought up a whole lot of really interesting points in our Patreon video, which was so cool. So webcomic only fetishism. This is something we really had sort of maybe kind of like embryonically evolving in our minds, but it didn't sort of come to, fruition, and you've like birthed this fantastic idea. So give us a rundown of this again.
Well, the theme got me thinking of sexual fetishes, fetishes that are only possible in comics, such as like giantism or furries or tentacle comics or tentacle sex or vor or inflation, which could only be possible if you're drawing it. And also, I'm curious, there are tons of fetish websites about things like foot fetishes or rubber or leather, but I wonder if there are also whole subcultures or websites dedicated to comics only kinds of fetishism, or subcultures that are dedicated to things like vor or inflation or something like that. And well, just in case the terminology is too obscure, vor means like consuming or eating things as a sexualized fetish thing. So obviously you can't do that in real life, but you can draw it.
Exactly. And this reminded us of the comic that used to be super popular on Drunkduck, which was Craving Control, about vorism, where a woman who is a very kind of stereotypically like Barbie doll, sexually attractive woman, big bust, thin waist, big bottom, would not be able to control herself, would consume vast amounts of food, and her body would swell up, sort of pregnant, huge, and her breast size would, dramatically inflate. So that's inflation as well. So that's another kind of a fetish. And then it would, for some reason, she would magically shrink down again in size. And this is, like you say, something that is only possible with in comics. And it was enormously popular. Like, it was popular almost universally on the Duck, with people who you would normally who would be into like a specific fetish. And I think that was like, it had crossover appeal because it appealed to people who like the idea of food and what's the idea of people who like all kind of shapes and sizes of bodies. So body positivity. So it appealed to that, the idea of like being thin and stereotypically beautiful isn't the only kind of beautiful and sexually attractive. You can also be that when you're big. So it appealed to that aspect, and it brought in a lot of people because they like seeing a sexy woman with big boobs. So it was massively popular.
I remember, I also was a fan. I really liked it, and I had no idea that it could be considered like a fetish comic. But it had very clever writing. I think it felt a lot like a subtle sort of satire in certain episodes that it had, and I just really liked it. I remember. I wonder, do we still have it on site? I don't remember.
No, the artist has. It's really hard to find anything about it because the artist deleted their work not only from Drunkduck but from all the web. Because that's the other. That is another aspect of things that can be considered fetishism. It means it's slightly socially there's this social ostracism in there, or like it things become fetishes because they're not socially accepted, I suppose. So it means there's social consequences to liking fetishes or to creating them, which means you can that you can get in trouble, like with your workmates in your community, and so there's a consequence. We had a whole QUACKCAST about this creator of a comic on our site called Tina's Story, which is about a man and his relationship with an anthropomorphic poodle dog. So
he got in trouble, didn't he?
Yeah. He this guy was like a mayor of his town or something, or like some kind of a minor political official, and he lost his position, that's a horrible thing to happen to a person, and he can't ever be elected again because of the comic that he was into. And it's fantasy. Who cares about what someone draws? But his opponents used it against him, and that was the end. So I don't know what happened to him since. So
yeah. Well, it is sort of a liability. Like if I have a commercial client who wants to see my comics, I send them to my personal website that has just that. Because if I sent them to the Duck, they might find like the sexual one, and someone like Bank of America might not want to know that about. So it's the same dynamic there.
Yeah. Oh, right. So, like, this is something that strikes in everybody. It's very hard to be like fully open or fully like just like available to have your full creative portfolio on view, because you have to separate those worlds, don't you? It's it can create problems.
I seem to recall, and I don't remember the names because I'm terrible with names and everything that needs memory. That one of the most seminal creators of Superman back in the day also did some pretty kinky comics that had I think bondage or something.
Wonder
like
Woman,
that.
I think you're thinking of.
Was it Wonder Woman?
Wonder Woman started out as a fetish comic.
Yeah, and they had to sort of sweep it under the rug because it was a problem later with all the censorship and stuff like that. I remember something like that vaguely.
True. Wonder Woman started out as a bondage fetish comic. That's why she was always getting tied up with the lasso. Because the creator, this man, his partner, and there was another woman in the relationship. So there's two women in the relationship, and this fellow, and they had a sort of a bondage, submissive, dominant relationship, and it involved being tied up, and that was what he was into, and that was what Wonder Woman was about. Not about like a prurient kind of like, oh, I'm going to get off in this. He wanted to normalize it and show that it was a good thing, that being tied up was a positive kind of healthy thing, and that was what Wonder Woman was about. Had you heard about that, Fallopian?
I had also. I remember hearing that. I thought it was also like one of the creators of Superman, or one of the mainstream comics, who also had a side gig doing fetish comics of some kind or another.
Okay.
I'll check right now.
So maybe it was Superman as well. Maybe it all came from that.
Yeah.
What, Spiegel and I can't remember the creators of Superman.
Okay, so it was, I don't know how to pronounce him very well, Joe Shuster.
Schuster, yeah.
Okay, he co-created Superman in the 30s, Google says. But he also made a cultural impact with a series of sadomasochistic underground comics
Well,
that are at the center of a film deal that was back in 2009. So, fetish art of Superman's co-creator Joe Shuster, and that was hidden until now.
well, there we go. So both Superman and Wonder Woman, who are both on the DC, banner, both have a connection to fetishism. That is incredible.
Yeah.
Who knew? Jeez.
And now that I think about it, there was another fetish artist, Tom of Finland, who did just gay comics, but he kind of is credited with starting the whole leather daddy movement, where it was all like gay sexual stories, but everyone was wearing like leather motorcycle outfits and officers' uniforms and those sorts of things. So that was like another example of in a way, like a whole, like, and he was doing this in the 50s and the 40s even, of a whole kind of subculture being spawned by what started out as comics.
Wow, that's incredible. So leather fetishism can be said to have had comics as its instigator.
Or at least brought it to light in a
True.
more...
We could even say, I would think that cartoons like Betty Boop would easily fit into that.
Yes.
So, because she basically is walking around in a corset and
She is. And now that I think about it, but an early artistic depiction of that kind of B&D leather fetishism is Venus in Furs. And there's a famous Velvet Underground song about that, like Severin and all those kind of characters. So I think that was, I can't remember where that dates from, like maybe the 20s or the 30s or something. So that made its way into visual imagery. You know the famous Venus in Furs song by Velvet Underground? Shiny, shiny, shiny boots of leather. It's so cool.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, so yeah, it's quite an old kind of thing. Like I don't know where leather fetishism started, but yeah, it's old.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, interestingly, I was also reading like it's quite popular in Japan is like tentacle sex, and that actually goes back to wood blocks from I think like the 1700s of like Japanese mythology about like a pearl diver and her relationship with an octopus or something like that. So some of these themes go way back, and also like visual depictions of these themes go quite a way back as well. Yeah,
that's a damn good point. Yeah, it's not just like a modern anime manga thing. It is it came from art, and probably like maybe it had some religious aspects, because like if we think about ancient Greek religion, there's all these kind of things about Zeus turned into this creature and mated with, this woman in order to produce, this kind of strange demigod. And maybe that has a mirror in, Japanese mythology as well, about, a woman mating with an octopus. So I'm not sure about the specifics, but it's likely. Like sea gods, who knows? Well, I also mentioned to Tance that like one of the things behind the creation of my mine and Bane's comic, Bottomless Waitress, was the fact that one of my visual fetishes is bottomless women. Women with no just walking around bottomless. Yeah, exactly. So that was behind the creation of that comic, and because it's like a funny idea as well, and there's also the pun if you're in a cafe or a diner, bottomless, like you would think that refers to bottomless coffee or whatever. So, and we've done a literal kind of thing there. So yeah, that was a fetish that was like behind our whole idea. And I didn't even realize that I do a fetish comic in a way. So there you go.
Yeah.
We all do it. And Tance was telling me, like, do you mind me saying, Tance?
What? No.
Okay, so Tance's thing is really long hair on male characters, but you don't do that very much in your comics.
Unfortunately, the 40s were not amenable to my particular but in my fantasy novel, my saga, everyone has long hair. And actually, I have managed to do the perfect storm and fuse long hair with politics. So imagine like the sheer joy I take from being in that universe. So yeah, I really like the aesthetics of long hair in general. I mean, with very few exceptions. It's not that I don't like short hair. I also like short hair on people. Like, I'm not particular in that, like, to that level, but long hair for me is a thing of beauty. And I always appreciate it on people. So having it on men that have the very pronounced jawline that women do not have as much, and all of that, like, that really does it for me. I really like it. So all of my main characters in the Art of Veiling feature long hair.
So there you are. So when you do the comic version, you can finally get it out there.
I'm not that brave, because to draw that thing, just the first volume is only like 600 pages, and there are another 2 volumes with increasing page number.
Well, when you
I cannot do this.
When you do the abridged version.
But I might illustrate a bit now, because now I'm considering. So, yeah.
Covers.
I may illustrate some.
So given that, Tance and I have talked about our visual kind of relationship there. So with the depiction of Chthonus, that's the character's name, isn't it?
Correct. Yes.
Yes. Yeah. It just came to me. So with her depiction and her comics, do you have any visual representations of fetishes within those comics?
I think I've always been attracted to very athletic women, not really steroid bodybuilders, but more like gymnasts and swimmers. And I've kind of skewed her in that direction, like with lots of veins on her arms and stuff like that. But yeah, that would be as close as I came to like an actual fetish in my visuals.
Well, she's a very impressive physicality, Chthonus, because she's an orc, of course. So she's naturally of a type where she's quite bulky, but she's very impressive. It creates a very distinctive, singular kind of character that you do not see in many comics. How many comic characters look? Even She-Hulk just looks like a normal woman who's slightly taller than average. and slightly more muscular. With Chthonius is more mesomorphic. She has got quite a bit more bulk to her, big shoulders and stuff like that. So she's.
But she manages. Oh, sorry, please.
I wanted her to sort of always be like straddling the fence between sexy and scary.
Mm-hmm. Oh, you have managed that. Personally, I really like her. She drew my attention, to be honest, as I was reading through various comics as a judge, I think, a couple of years ago or something like that. And it so happened that yours was nominated as well. And she was extremely impressive. So, and she does look feminine, like a strong woman, but feminine. And that is something that I really appreciate, because usually what I see is like either edges of either like the extremes of the pendulum, like either super skinny, busty, hourglass shape, or so muscular that they lose their femininity, in a sense, like a bodybuilder level. So kudos. I love it.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, she's beautifully drawn, of course, because you're an exceptional artist. And the Betty Page hairstyle as well. We can't forget that. So
yeah,
and that comes again from that's like that's a fetish on its own. The Betty Page hairstyle. It's nothing like a gimp mask. It's iconic.
Yes, correct. Yeah.
So
yeah, or people have asked me like, what was her theme, and I frequently said she's like a cross between Betty Page and Ronda Rousey, who's like the world famous MMA fighter. So.
Oh, very cool, very cool. Now the people might bring up who's the lady from Mandalorian, Gina something or other. Gina.
Yes, I know who you're talking about. Yeah, she was another MMA fighter. Yeah.
Oh yes, yeah.
I think it was Caruso or something like that, or
yeah, Caruso,
Italian
Carino
name.
or something. Yeah.
Yeah.
Another person with that same kind of bulky look, but also a feminine kind of look. Not like too often when people, like Tant said, draw a muscular woman, they're just basically just drawing a man and giving her long hair and big lips.
Yeah.
Big lips. Boobs. And boobs.
Oh yeah. Boobs. I mean, and when we get right down to it, there's nothing wrong with that, because there are women who have bodies like that, and there are trans women and things like that, so that's fine. But
and speaking about fetishes, oh sorry, go ahead.
No, go on.
Speaking about fetishes, there's a whole subgenre also of like muscle worship and men who like worship bodybuilders. So there is that extreme as well.
Oh yeah, definitely. And like I know there are subcultures of like even taking that further, there's this idea of a man being beaten up and assaulted by these extremely muscular women, and not being like sexually assaulted, just being physically abused, and that is a fetish. They like to see men being physically abused because they imagine themselves in being abused by this incredibly muscular woman, and they find that appealing.
And there is a webcomic out there. I'll try to think of the name, that's specifically just about men and women kicking each other in the genitals, and like that's every story is just about that. So there's a whole other subgenre right there.
That is incredible. I love it.
Okay.
I think we're going to have like a a new kind of category on the duck of fetishes, and so people can have like list their
yeah,
comments.
why not? That could be a thing. I mean, speaking of like completely like a tangent or trajectory or whatever, but we could say that there are fetishes hidden in more mainstream stuff. Like, for example, take steampunk, where you have, you know, a lot of ladies in corsets and lots of buckles and lots of straps and leather and, you know, buckles everywhere. And,
Yeah,
like that could be considered
that's a good.
sort of hinting at something like that. I'm not saying that it is necessarily. I'm just saying that there is such a.
That's a good point, because in the 19th century, of course, women wore corsets. That was the main thing, because it was like, you know, back support, bust support, as well as like creating a silhouette that you know, people like found fashionable. But there was a culture of tight lacing in the 19th century, and it became like a fetish. And it wasn't, everybody didn't tight lace. This was only like people who could afford to do that and were really into it. And they went to extremes. And that was, I would say that was definitely a fetish, and that is still a fetish today. We still have that. So
yeah, absolutely, yeah. Or there's a guy named Fakir Musafar who kind of was a pioneer in the whole body modification movement back in the 50s, who, like, there's photos of him like wearing corsets, like where his waist is scarcely more than like a pack of cigarettes in size. And,
oh my God.
Like just the spine.
Yeah, just the spine, yeah.
So a little narrow kind of thing for the blood vessels and the I don't know, intestine to come through, and that's all you need. Oh my Lord. Yeah. Oh. Wow. Must have had a heap of core support.
That absolutely obliterates the one story that I had in mind for tight lacing that comes from the 19th century, which was this, you know, very high class lady that was considered, I don't know, like an influencer or a model of the time, like very, very influential. And she was, of course, quote unquote, tight lacing. And there was this bet that was spontaneously had among the gentlemen of the gathering, that she was wearing this pearl necklace, and that she could not clip this pearl necklace around her waist. And the bet was that if she managed, she would get another one exactly like this. And that was like super expensive. So she did. So that was the story. Yes. And she earned a second necklace.
And Fakir would be doing that with a bracelet.
Yeah.
A wristwatch.
Absolutely. Oh.
Wow. Now that's pretty amazing. I mean, we do still see it today. And one of the unfortunate things is people mistake tight lacing for how normal people wore corsets.
Yeah.
And then we come up with the idea of, corsets were bad, corsets kill people, you know. Whereas, no, they didn't wear it for like over 100 years and all die.
Corsets have existed since like around the 1500s.
Yeah, but in different forms, like bodices
yeah,
and things.
But they were still corsets. I mean, they were called stays or stuff like that. But it was a bigger bra in a sense, because the whole point was to just support the assets and make the dress sit properly on the torso, and that's all it was about. It wasn't about, you know, squeezing you out of existence or anything like that.
Unless you're really into it, I suppose.
Unless you're really into it.
You wonder, like, for the people who wear them, like obviously there's a physical strain, but I mean, is the appeal the physical strain that it does to them when they're wearing it, or is it the way they look, or is it both those things?
I don't know because I haven't ever worn one. Oh, I'm curious, I have to say. But I think those that do wear it like on a daily basis, and it's not just for cosplay or something very extreme or whatever, they say that it actually offers comfort because it supports the back and keeps the posture well. No.
But what about the people who fetishize it?
I don't know. I guess they like I don't know.
Because I know when, I'm quite a thin person myself, and where I wear these old-fashioned antique clothes, and a lot of them are very form-fitting, have extremely tight waists. These jodhpurs that I just got from the 1930s, these US military issue jodhpurs, they have quite a tight waist. It's 28 inches. So that's not very small, but for a man, that's rather narrow. And so that they're quite form fitting for me, and it feels good to have something that form fitting on you, like to be that tight around your waist. It actually has a good feeling. So that's a sort of a window into it. Although 28 inches is nothing compared to these women. That's like obese compared to these tight lacing people.
I think the tight lacing is like as extreme as
6 inches.
As extreme as going into extreme piercing or going into anything extreme that modifies the body. That would fall under that category. Rather than anything regular.
And when you were talking about, say, the steampunk stuff with corsets, you try and think about, okay, so is this a fetish, or are they just doing this because this is a cultural thing and they're representing it? I'm thinking in terms of women with large breasts, so that is a fetish. People will draw characters with huge breasts. But also that's part of just mainstream culture, and a lot of men think, oh, it's a woman, I must give her a huge bust because that's what women have, whereas women don't. It's like not many women have giant busts, but these comic artists think that every woman does. So it can be hard in some kind of ways to distinguish, oh, that's done because it's a fetish, or that's done because that's what this person thinks real people look like.
Or it's just like a nod to Victorian times, maybe. Also, there's also that. I think it depends on how it is drawn a lot more. For example, I'm thinking a few years ago, before all my anime and manga was stolen, I used to collect it. And one of it was, I don't remember the title exactly. It was about some ghost hunters, I think, and there was and their base of operations was in a hospital. And in any case, it was nothing sexual. There was, it was not hentai or anything like that. But you got every every four or five panels, you've got an upskirt shot of a girl's panties. In various, the author, the creator, I guess, got all excuses he could to draw panties on girls.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah,
me.
I almost feel like that's a convention in manga. Like the upskirt shot is always there. It's very disturbing, but I guess for the consumers of that, it's normal.
Yeah, that's.
I was bewildered because that was the first one I had that had these kinds of shots, there, and I was like, are we going anywhere with this? Do we want to go anywhere with this? Hopefully, thankfully, it didn't go anywhere with this. It was just
Yeah, that's a point where is it fetishism or convention? Yeah, and it is convention, but to us it would be considered fetish. So that's a cultural difference between us and the Japanese. I was thinking of a famous artist who achieved sort of mainstream success, Robert Crumb, and this fellow was heavily into all sorts of fetishes. Remember, Fritz the Cat was his big kind of famous thing. Became an animation and stuff like that. But he used to draw huge-legged women and used to be into feet and cowboy boots and all sorts of things.
Yeah. And I think even in real life, he was really into getting piggyback rides from large women.
Jeez, really?
I remember an interview with him on that documentary that was made about him. I think there were a few shots of like he had a friend who was a very statuesque woman who was like carrying him around and stuff. But oh, and speaking of fetishes, like he had one character named Mr. Snoid who lived inside of a woman's gastrointestinal tract, and that was a whole other fetish right there.
That's glorious. So he just went and just put everything out on paper. He was fully open about this stuff.
Yeah.
Like, he wasn't one of these people who separate life into different circles, because his bread and butter was his work. And that's what people were into about him.
And I am sort of seeing some mainstream comic book artists who are venturing out into their subcategory of pornographic stuff, and they're not hiding it at all. It's like, I do these fetishistic sex comics and I do superheroes for Marvel at the same time. So to me, it's sort of nice to see it normalized, where it's not like you were talking about with the guy who did the Tina comic where it destroyed his career.
Yeah, which was quite sad. But you're right. Now that like in this point in time, it's sexuality isn't demonized as much as it used to be. So we're able to do, to have this stuff on show. Like, a lot of people have OnlyFans, like different aspects of sex work are becoming more mainstream, and like different sexualities, as well as like different genders and all that kind of stuff are no longer like considered like weird or bizarre. This has become more normal. So like all these things together mean that artists, like you say, artists who do stuff that would have normally be considered a bit fetishistic or too adult, feeling that they're able to be more open about this stuff, which is a good thing. I think it's positive.
Yeah. Another artist I'm reminded of is Richard Corbin, who definitely had a large breast fetish and also a bodybuilder fetish, and his men usually had penises that were like as large as their legs, and it was particularly disturbing because his rendering style was so photorealistic. To see these fetish things drawn so realistically was very disturbing.
I must look up his works. That reminds me of Wally Wood, who I think it's Wally Wood. Yeah, and he was apparently behind Power Girl and her boob window and having big boobs, I think. So I don't know if you've heard
he
about
definitely
that.
had a split career. He did some pornographic stuff as well. I think he did a whole sexual version of Alice in Wonderland that you can still find out there.
Yeah, I've heard about that. Yeah, and speaking of that, who did the Lost Girls comic? Was that Neil Gaiman or someone? No.
I'm not sure.
So that in Lost Girls, the idea is I think there's like there's Alice from Wonderland, there's Dorothy from Wizard of Oz, and a few others, and like Lost Girls as opposed to Lost Boys from Peter Pan. So that's like this. That's where the name comes from. But they get in all kinds of sexual adventures and stuff like that, and that's tied to this person's mainstream work. Oh god, it's all flooding into my head now. Witchblade. Now that's a very kind of fetishistic looking comic, and it's totally mainstream.
Yeah, I've heard about it, but I've never read that one very much. But yeah, from what you're saying, I'm also reminded of another comic book artist named Adam Hughes. And I remember in an interview he was saying like, "Oh, I don't do porn or sex comics." But if you look at his artwork, it's all porn. It's all like the upskirt shot. It's all women in string bikinis with giant breasts, and so I think there's a whole other kind of blurred boundary where, and I think especially in U.S. mainstream comics, all these skin tight outfits are all kind of fetishistic anyway. Like, why don't they just admit it and do it straight up? But
yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, is it? Then we get into the thing we mentioned before about like, is it convention or is it fetish? But often, as a creator, one of the reasons you get into drawing these kind of things is because it turns you on or because this excites you. So that's part of what's behind us as creators. We do stuff we enjoy. So yeah, like you look at the art of Rob Liefeld, like his very stylized kind of imagery that he does. It's totally way out and ridiculous. Obviously, he seems to have a thing for super muscly men and women with very specific proportions.
Yeah. And actually, I remember now a friend of mine who was in the mainstream comic book industry in the mid 90s was saying a lot of these artists were using the reference they used for their female superhero characters were usually Hustler magazine. And he would even show like, look at the latest issue of Hustler magazine and then look at the latest issues of superhero comics, and it's all the same poses. Like, so that was, a hypersexuality that was disguising itself as superhero comics.
Yes, yeah, that's a good point. I think the Greg Land was one of these artists who was a real offender. That's a loaded term. He was someone who was very known for that. You could very easily point out, oh, Hustler, Playboy, Penthouse, like the characters are just copied completely from this.
Yeah. And to your point, also, the creators are going to do what they like, but in mainstream comics, that's also titillating the audience, and I'm sure that's part of the sales potential is that kind of subcurrent of hypersexuality.
Oh yeah, definitely. And like in mainstream comics, there's the body beautiful kind of thing. People have a very there's limited sort of body types. You do not get people who are too far outside of that. I think maybe that's changing now, but generally all the men are the same body and all the women are the same body pretty much. Just slightly bigger, slightly smaller, and it's all like what is considered in the mainstream to be beautiful with the same kind of proportions and like
yeah.
So,
and I'm reminded also of that comic Vampirella. I don't know if it's still around, but she had like a ridiculously tiny costume. But I wonder also if that tied in, if that was kind of a dog whistle for some people of like a blood drinking fetish, which is certainly out there as well.
Yes, cutting fetishes and yeah, blood. I'm just writing this down. Yeah, she always had like the trickles of blood on the corners of her mouth, and of course she's a vampire, and the comics are about vampirism in one kind of way or another. Yeah, so multiple fetishes covered in that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's an interesting story about how her costume was created. I think it was a woman that created the costume originally, and it just progressively got smaller and smaller.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, until it became what it is now. And speaking of Vampirella, of course, related characters like who's that famous Cassandra Peterson created her alter ego of goodness sake, I can't remember. Big busty kind of woman with black hair. She's sort of like Morticia. Or
is that Elvira?
Elvira, that's it, Elvira.
Yeah.
And she actually features in comics as well, weirdly enough.
Sure, yeah. Was she originally like a hostess of sort of a horror movie show or something like that?
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, like the Crypt Keeper or whoever else, who does that, introduces horror movies, and she became the character, kind of transcended that and went into comics, and that plays off a particular kind of fetishism, which started with oh damn it, I can't remember, but there was a in the 50s or the 60s there was a woman who like typified that kind of horror movie kind of look, and that's what Vampirella's based on, and of course Lily Munster and Morticia and all that, and that kind of look is a specific fetish in its own right.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and the whole kind of goth culture has ties to S&M fetish wear here and there. Not that I'm an expert on that.
That's a really good point. And Neil Gaiman, who created Sandman and all that, is a bit of a look. That's an aesthetic that his work would often have. And we can bring up things like the Crow as well. So that's a character that has that goth kind of punk looks, and there's fetishism within that. Oh, I love this. There's hidden fetishes spread throughout all the comic world that we never even kind of thought about.
Yeah. And it's interesting how, like you're saying, a lot of stuff that was hidden is now becoming normalized. Like I remember in like the late 80s, a lot of body modification was a really weird tattoo or a really weird taboo. Like when I got my piercings, I had to travel from New York to San Francisco to find anyone who would actually do it. But now it's like any tattoo parlor will do like all sorts of different body piercings. So it's become much more mainstream, and I think that's really interesting.
That is a huge change. And of course in comics, when you were talking about before, the fetishes that can only exist in comics. So with the body modification thing, comics take that way far out, in that people have like cyberpunk kind of additions to their bodies, and mechanical pieces, like in the steampunk stuff they have cogs and all this kind of stuff, but and then
cyborg
just
style stuff.
Yeah, cyborg, but then we've got like people with like body modifications that are not that, but just piercings that you couldn't have in reality. Like, I mean, I have seen kind of extreme stuff that we have, like the windows and the cheeks and all that kind of stuff. But like Hellraiser kind of level of stuff. Maybe guts spread open, nails in bodies, all that kind of stuff. So,
yeah. Or you can't have those kind of piercings and survive them anyway.
Yes, exactly. You have a very, very short time.
Yeah.
But that's an excellent example of taking those to extreme.
Yeah. Or even like beyond cyborgs, just like sex comics where one partner is a straight up robot with like screws and springs and stuff. Right. Another example of what you can't do in real life.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good point. Yeah. So we've got like very mechanical kind of sex with mechanical kind of people, and then we've got going into the cyberpunk version, we've got the idea of like virtual sex partners and all this. Like the real life version of that is incredibly primitive, but in comics they can take it to the futuristic extreme, or the futuristic kind of logical conclusion of having like a fembot or a manbot or whatever. So you can create your own sexual partner, and we could say that's a fetish.
Also, that one of the main characters in that movie, AI, I think, then where it was about this kid robot that becomes like the protege of this sex bot played by
Jude Law.
Yes, thank you, by Jude Law, and who was supposedly this super efficient sex bot that could change names and faces and was fully customizable.
Yes, so just to be clear, the child wasn't a sex bot. He was a
no,
Pinocchio.
Became a protege.
Exactly.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah, that was Spielberg's futuristic take on Pinocchio. It's it's an interesting film. Yeah, that's a good point. So that's taking a fetish robot and taking him doing the whole Tusk Cathonis route and taking him mainstream.
Yeah.
So it all comes back to that.
I don't know if you mentioned that while I was away, but we have a whole mainstream series. I mean, it's not a comic, but it is a series of books for wine moms that is all about S&M and fetishes and stuff, and that is all the shades of all the grays. So you like, if that's not the fetish story, I don't know what is. So.
Well, very much so. It's a mainstreamed a version of S&M. I mean, it's a stylized version for mainstream consumption, but like S&M, B&D kind of stuff. It's themed on that, and people love it. So
yeah,
I mean,
I don't know. I mean, the only excerpts I have read are those that are being read on YouTube in Mickey Mouse voice. I don't know how far it goes, to be honest.
Funny that has become like almost fully mainstream. Like what we were saying, like Felipe and Crusader brought up that people are now they're doing their more transgressive stuff openly because they're able to now. And that writer, that's her mainstream bread and butter. That stuff. Which is weird. From our point of view.
Yeah. On your mention of the Mickey Mouse voices reminded me there was an underground comic in the 70s called Air Pirates, where the guy specifically took Disney characters and did pornographic stuff with them.
Oh my God.
And I remember reading an interview with him where he was saying like the Disney Corporation just like made it their crusade to destroy his career because of that. But apparently like those comics are very rare because Disney like tried to recall all of them.
Oh, the whole IP protection, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, you don't want.
Yeah, and to not associate them with porn.
Speaking on that theme, I've heard that apparently this is true, that when Disney animators, all these artists are drawing these characters, when they're working on them, they what happens is, as artists do in their downtime or to have fun, they sometimes do like sexual kind of caricatures of these Disney characters that they're tasked with drawing and creating, Little Mermaid or Donald Duck or whatever, and they just do that as a matter of course, as adults, grown people do. And what apparently happens is, because they're working for Disney when they're doing it, that is considered work for hire. So anything they produce as part of their contract is owned by Disney, including the sex drawings. What apparently happens is Disney collects all the sex drawings, and they're all in a portfolio somewhere in a file, and you can actually, if you're able to, if you know the right people, you can actually go and see the sex file of the Disney sex drawings. They have them there somewhere. I don't know if that's like a fake story, but I've heard it from a couple of sources that seem to be reliable. So, yeah.
I guess they are in the vault, which is a fitting place to be, I suppose, for fetish.
Exactly. They're in the dungeon. Oh dear. Well, we should probably wrap up about now, because we've gone over the hour, and we've had a great deal of fun discussing all these things. Unless you want to add anything, Flopian?
No, I think we sort of ran over all the salient points, so I'm good.
Okay. Tans?
I have completed my repertoire of whatever I know.
Oh, well, thank you very much for listening to QUACKCAST 557, and thank you for coming along, A Fallopian Crusader.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
No worries, you're an awesome guest. All right. Bye-bye, everyone. Bye-bye.
All right, take care.
Thank you.